The earth is shaking in Japan once again. A swarm of over 1,200 earthquakes have been plaguing the country's southern islands since late June. And unlike most other swarms, which tend to subside after a few days or weeks, this one just keeps going and going. This swarm has lasted longer than any other in modern Japanese history, and it's all happening beneath an area known as the Tokara Islands, a small group of uninhabited islands that lie between Japan and Taiwan. But what exactly is an earthquake swarm, and why are these ones so significant? Join me today as we look at the bizarre case of Japan's endless earthquakes. Earthquakes are incredibly common around Japan, especially around its western coast, where 4 of the world's tectonic plates come crashing together. The country experiences thousands of earthquakes every year, many of them big enough to shake buildings and knock priceless works of art off museum walls. But while most of these earthquakes happen as part of a well-known tectonic dance, others are more of an unwelcome surprise. And the current swarm in the Tokara Islands is proving to be a bit of a head-scratcher for geologists. An earthquake swarm is pretty much what it sounds like, a swarm of earthquakes. It's when an area experiences a sudden increase in seismic activity. And while they're not unheard of, they do make up only about 10% of all earthquakes. Scientists aren't exactly sure what causes them, and they can be tricky to forecast. As the name suggests, they also tend to happen in groups with hundreds or even thousands of quakes, rattling an area within a short period of time. However, unlike typical earthquakes, which have a main shock followed by smaller aftershocks, all the quakes in a swarm are usually of roughly the same size. They also tend to be smaller than the main event of a typical earthquake sequence. Now, while not necessarily dangerous in themselves, earthquake swarms can be serious because they may indicate that an area is experiencing unrest that could lead to bigger things. For instance, they can signal the release of gases from deep within the Earth's crust, or the movement of magma underground. This means that an earthquake swarm might be a precursor to volcanic activity, or even an eruption. That's not the case for Japan's Tokara Islands, however, as there are no volcanoes anywhere near the swarm zone, so what else could it mean? Before we get into that first, let's take a look at the Tokara Islands swarm itself. As we mentioned, the Tokara Islands are a small cluster of mostly uninhabited islands located south of Japan's main islands, the islands that are home to Tokyo, Osaka, and other major cities. In late June 2021, a swarm of earthquakes started rattling the islands. Since then, the area has experienced over 1,200 quakes, with dozens still happening every day. While most of these earthquakes are too weak to be felt by humans, some have reached a magnitude of 5 or 6 on the Richter scale. Thankfully, there have been no reports of damage or injuries as a result of the swarm. In fact, despite being quite close to major population centers such as Osaka and Fukuoka, as well as densely populated islands such as Okinawa, the Tokara Islands themselves have no permanent residents. The largest of the islands, Kitadaito, has a maximum elevation of only 243 meters or 797 feet. The highest point on the second largest island, aka Island, is just 115 meters or 374 feet above sea level. All of the islands are low and flat and consist of limestone formed from the skeletons of dead coral. It's not exactly prime real estate, and so the islands have remained uninhabited throughout recorded history. While the islands themselves are uninhabited, they are sometimes visited by fishermen and, of course, scientists. In fact, one team of scientists happened to be conducting research on the islands when the earthquake swarm began. These researchers were with the Japan Agency for Marine Earth Science and Technology, or JAMSTEC. They had been studying the islands as part of a project to map the ocean floor. The project involved collecting data on gravity variations across the islands using a method called gravity anomalies mapping, using a network of absolute gravimeters. Basically, they had set up a bunch of equipment to measure subtle changes in gravity across the islands. When the swarm began, the scientists were forced to abandon their work and head back to the mainland. But before leaving, they managed to collect some useful data that helped scientists better understand the swarm. After all, the equipment they had left behind continued recording data throughout the entire ordeal. So what did the data tell us? Well, thanks to their work, we now know that the earthquakes are all happening about 8 to 10 kilometers beneath the surface, or about 5 to 6 miles. This is relatively shallow for earthquakes, which typically happen at depths of several tens to several hundreds of kilometers. It's shallow enough, in fact, that if the quakes were to happen closer to the mainland, they could potentially cause some serious damage. But thankfully, the Tokara Islands are fairly remote. We also now know that the earthquakes aren't focused in one particular spot, but are instead distributed across a rectangular area spanning about 120 square kilometers or 46 square miles. Within this area, there seems to be some connection between the earthquakes. Analysis of the data shows that the quakes tend to happen in groups, with some areas experiencing multiple quakes, while others stay relatively quiet. There's also a fair amount of synchronicity between the quakes, with some occurring simultaneously or very close to each other in terms of time. This kind of behavior is typical for quakes that are triggered by fluid pressure. It's thought that the movement of fluids like water or magma can trigger earthquakes by altering the stress levels on nearby faults. Essentially, when the fluids move, the stress on the fault changes, making it more likely for an earthquake to occur. This is supported by the fact that the largest earthquakes in the swarm also show signs of being triggered by smaller events. But what could be causing the fluids to move in the first place? One idea is that the earthquakes are being caused by the slow sinking of sediment and organic matter from the ocean above. Over time, this material builds up on the seabed, creating layers of mud that can extend several hundred meters. When this happens, the weight of the overlying sediment compresses the water contained within the mud, increasing fluid pressure along nearby faults. Eventually, the pressure becomes great enough to overcome the friction holding the fault together, triggering an earthquake. As the faults slip past one another, the pressure is released, allowing the cycle to start anew. This is often referred to as a slow slip earthquake because it happens gradually and over long periods of time. However, there's another theory that might explain what's happening in the Tokara Islands. According to this theory, the swarm is being caused by a buildup of gas rather than water. Specifically, it's thought that gas released from the Earth's mantle is causing the earthquakes. This gas is likely a mixture of nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and sulfur dioxide, similar to the composition of volcanic gases. The reason for this is that the islands sit atop a region where there's a lot of magma beneath the Earth's crust. Over time, some of this magma seeps into the cracks and pores of the rocks, bringing gases with it. Eventually, the pressure of the gases becomes great enough to trigger the earthquakes. Regardless of what's causing the earthquakes, scientists are keeping a close eye on the situation. Even though the Tokara Islands are uninhabited, the swarm could still pose a risk to people living on the mainland. If the earthquakes were to become larger or occur closer to heavily populated areas, they could potentially cause significant damage. For example, there's a small population of about 2,000 people living on the nearby island of Okinawa. If the earthquakes were to hit closer to this area, they could potentially cause casualties and damage to property. As a result, the Japan Meteorological Agency has been closely monitoring the swarm, releasing daily updates on its development. They've also set up a system to automatically notify residents of any significant increases in seismic activity. For now, however, it seems that the swarm will continue to pose little threat to anyone except scientists who are trying to figure out what's causing it. While the swarm has been ongoing for an unusually long time, there's no indication that it will get any worse. For the people living on the nearby islands, the best advice is probably just to keep calm and carry on regardless of what the cause may be. Earthquakes are incredibly common in Japan, and most of them are too weak to cause any damage. Even the bigger ones rarely last for more than a few weeks or months. Eventually, the swarm in the Tokara Islands will peter out and life will return to normal. Until then, scientists will continue to monitor the situation, hoping to learn more about what's causing the earthquakes. As always, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing.